Hey, I'm chatting with content conversion strategist Deb Coman. We've known each other for a long time, but have never really fully connected. So I've seen all the amazing things that you've done, Deb, how you are like crushing it on social media. You're being published in places, and your notoriety and your relationship building that you're doing online is just growing and growing. I love watching it.
Thank you so much, Lyndsay.
And what is really intriguing to me is this whole concept that you have about using social media and using content and creating trust building conversations that ignite sales. And there's like, we're not going to really talk about like the, converting to sales part of it. What I really love is like taking the promotion that we're doing as podcasters or guests and like, what does a trust building conversation mean, and how are we taking that element and kind of up leveling our content? So how do you, like, even before we post our podcast, like, what is trust in your online marketing world, and how do we create that before we even start posting?
Yeah, I love this. And it's something that I kind of have always done, but only recently forced myself to slow down enough to look at what are the actual steps I'm doing, because not everybody does it, right? We just do what we do.
I know.
And I realized that there was a practice that I was always doing that involved engaging with what was already out there first. So even though I'm a content creator, before I go and put out my post, what I want to be talking about, it's important to look particularly on social media or know from our listeners as a podcast host, what is it they're interested in?
Right.
How can I, jump into that conversation first, engage, build relationships, nurture trust, and then create content based on what I learned in that early process first.
That takes a lot of insight. Like, does it just come naturally? Because that wouldn't be natural to me. Like, I would just, I'm so focused on I'm a doer, not a doer, but like, you know what I mean? I like creating. I wouldn't necessarily organically think to go do that before I post, but it makes sense when you say it.
Yeah. And like I said, I've always done it. So yes, some of it is natural to me, I think. But what happened to me, and I'll tell you a quick story about what really kind of shined a light on, geez, I have a process here I haven't even recognized, was that my scheduled posts were coming to an end, as we all recognize sometimes, like, oops, I got to upload some new tweets or get some things together. And I realized, well, I can't just be absent until I get those together. Let me just open the platform. For me, it's primarily Twitter, but this can be anywhere in any social media platform, and see what's going on. What's already out there? What are people talking about? What's interesting to me? What can I contribute to? And just started engaging, and things just happened, which had happened all along, but it really kind of turned up the dial on it for me. And people were reaching out saying, I want you to come talk about this to my community or be on my Twitter chat or be on my podcast, because I was engaging. They weren't even really seeing me create something of my own just yet. And it's because of the trust that was being built.
And I guess when you're engaging, you're helping people, right? And so if you come across as like you're just trying to take part in the conversation and you're helping without any preconceived agenda in mind, like people connect with that.
Exactly. And many of us can see it when it's not as natural. And when I say natural, it doesn't mean it can't be learned, because I do teach my clients how to do this for themselves or uncover the part of them that actually can do it more naturally. We are coming from a place where our intention isn't the sale, much like you started out saying. Our intention is around making that connection, a meaningful connection that's not necessarily around what we do. It might be over our love of coffee or our love of furry pets, or, and the more we show up authentically, the more people feel interested enough that they want to learn more, and eventually it will lead to, well, what do you do and how do you help people? And oh, I have someone I want to introduce you to. but we don't step into it thinking, how can I sell my next thing by joining this conversation online? Because that's the part that doesn't really work. We see it happen.
No.
And it's just not welcome. And we get it because as consumers, we don't love it either, you know?
True.
So, but you're right, as creators or doers, we sometimes just don't recognize there's another element that can actually make things happen faster for us.
That's
and it's
true.
Super easy, Lyndsay. I mean, it's super easy.
I know. And I think it's like
there.
scheduling that time and like intentionally putting that step into motion before you do the knee-jerk reaction of just like create and post.
Yes, exactly. And that's why one of my steps in the trust process is reflecting exactly what you just said there. Is we do have a tendency like, oh, I got to post something, I got to get out there. And if we just pause and like I said, look at what's out there already and take a moment, then we could join those conversations that are happening there more meaningfully. And it actually will then lead to ideas for content that we know people already want. So similar to podcast hosting, when we read the comments, read the reviews, hear what people are sharing about us, then we know to incorporate more of that into our future shows.
Yeah, that makes total sense. And I've taken your course and the system that you have. And it's like, I love all the acronyms. I don't even know how you did it. Is trust, action, pen pal, and sale. So there's like 4 sections. So we kind of touched upon trust here. Obviously, there's more to it. But I really would like to dive into the action part, because to me, it's that how do you build trust when you're promoting your podcast? And so if you can kind of go into what action is or what that means and what those little steps are, so that we can keep this in mind when we are creating posts for podcasts or if we're guesting.
For sure. And you're right. I did work backwards with the acronyms, and it just helps, you know, people to kind of latch on to it a little bit better. And to understand that action is so important, because it's not just what we know about strategy or what we know works, but actually, like you said, what are the steps that we're going to take? And we do want with action, the first one is add value, which, you know, of course, that's what we want to do. And we want to bring value to our listeners and our community. But as I said earlier, to think about what is it they're asking for and already engaging with. So that's the kind of angle, if you will, that we want to present the latest podcast episode. So it may already, you know, it's already in the can, so to speak, but how we talk about it online, we want to speak to what's the value that they perceive, not that we perceive or hope they perceive, but what is it they're looking for? Let's talk about that part of what was covered in the episode. We also, and that leads to the C, which is connecting with what's already out there. So as we see places where there are conversations about a topic that we have a podcast about, we can join in, not saying, here's my, podcast, subscribe, but I love this topic too. I've had several recent guests, join in with that intention to connect with what's already happening there.
I love that. And it's almost like you said, like the podcast is in the can, it's already recorded, but it's how you're talking about it and how you're framing it, positioning, and even having that conversational, the information that you actually put in the social feed, like how you're crafting it really makes a difference.
Yes, absolutely. And I know you and I see eye to eye in this, as many of your listeners may, that when we say, here's our latest episode, or here's my latest blog, or fill in the blank, it's really not that inviting, right? No. Unless they already are a tried and true fan and they just can't wait. There's no enticement to kind of click and listen or subscribe. So what we really need to do is take that angle of really talking about what's important to them, and inviting them in by using a snippet from it, by taking a point that was a surprise or really humorous or whatever that is, and And that's the T of action is, being truthful. Maybe say this was a hard episode, or we talked about some really tough things, or, or whatever the reality is.
Yeah.
Like the tech gods were not playing nicely today, but we managed to get it done. Like, be open and honest
Be
about
human.
what part of you, right? Be human. And we tend to think, well, that's not always professional, but it's very connecting, right? It builds trust. It lets people know you get them because they've probably experienced something similar. So the more we can be truthful, keep it interesting with, action, the I in actions, keep it interesting. And again, interesting to those listeners, those people who are consuming the content. It may be interesting to us, but those don't always line up. And it's more important that we serve those listeners and the people that are consuming our content than our own needs. We also want to open dialogue. So the O is for opening dialogue. And we all know those ones that say, here it is, give it a listen and have fun. It's a little bit of like a hard stop, right? They go and listen to it and they're finished. We want to say, like, come back and let me know what you think. Did you try any of the tips that Lyndsay and Deb talked about today? We want to just invite them into that engagement and conversation. So always open it, and also keep the channels open.
Yeah.
So when someone responds, I love this episode, as we don't want to just say, oh, thanks. That's a closer.
This is a great tip. And I heard you say it on the training, and I was kind of like, oh, that's so true. Like, sometimes I expand, but sometimes you just say thanks because you don't know what else to say.
Yeah. Yes, exactly. And that can be okay. So I don't want anyone who's in that practice to feel bad about it. It's great to reply, but look at each one as an opportunity to expand. How can you expand? Not everybody wants to do it. Not everybody wants to say what they liked about it, but we can invite that. We can say, I loved it too, and here's why. Yeah. And that might spark them to respond as well.
Yeah. And I agree. And as soon as you said it, I was just kind of like, oh, that makes sense. Why did I not know that? But to say like, oh, I'm so glad you liked it. What was your favorite part? Or why did it resonate so well? Yes. Or, was there any part of it that you found confusing? Or did you have a question about any of it? Or whatever that may be, kind of like asking that question back to kind of, bring it in.
Exactly. And to keep it, vary it a little bit. So if we have a tendency to always, and there are a lot of people who say, what was your greatest takeaway? And as you know, after a while, people stop seeing those kind of questions because they're just all over the place. So they don't carry as much weight or meaning.
It feels like a pat response.
Exactly. And that's what I mean about when I talk about marketing practices, you kind of have to stay on top of what's working, what people's needs are, because it changes. So you might say, could you believe what happened to her when she, whatever, pick a story from the podcast, or have you ever had something similar happen? So mix it up a little. And again, it requires us to be really specific in what we're posting, but it also invites people to listen in if they didn't already. So some will say, great job, love your podcast, but they didn't actually listen. So we don't want to like shame them into with a question that shows they didn't listen, but we might take it as another opportunity to get them to listen in.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I do find that, like, for me, even when I'm, posting about podcasts, I kind of like take a concept and ask a question back. Like if it's about Facebook ads for podcasts, it's like, who out there has done Facebook ads for podcasts? What has your experience been? Like, I also want insight from you, the audience. I don't want to just push information out. Right. I want to hear what other people's tips are or insights, or are they freaked out by doing Facebook ads, or whatever that question is. So just asking those, like, it's almost like a conversation starter, basically, from the concept of your podcast.
Absolutely. And whether you have a podcast that's a solo podcast, you don't have guests, you want to invite the conversation in. If you have guests, you want to be sure to pull them in, because good guests, as we all know, are also watching the feed on what's happening with their conversations about their episodes. And if you're not, that's something you really want to be doing, because you're getting the visibility and opportunity to talk to that community beyond the podcast episode. So they'll often be invited back if we extend that and tag them when it's on social media, then they can join in on the conversation as well. Which kind of wraps up our action with the N, which is nurturing. That it's not just like you're going to do this one time and the sales are going to come flooding in and the opportunities, sometimes they do, but it's also about like creating connections that we want to kind of stick with and nurture over time.
And thinking, beyond the podcast post. Which leads me to step into, so your other two elements are pen pal and sales. I know we don't have time to go in all of them, but I do want you to touch on pen pal, because I think this part is really crucial and it's often missed.
Yeah. So the pen pal applies to posting. It can also apply to doing your episode or any kind of content that you want to be posting or podcasting, talking to one person at a time. So again, when we write that post to share the episode or whatever we're doing, we want to make sure we're not like speaking from the podium in our language, so that it's conversational. It's really kind of reaching out to one person. I feel more pulled in when I see a post like that. It's just natural.
Me too.
Again, back to the engaging and expanding. So you want to make sure you're pulling that listener, that reader of the content into the conversation and inviting them to add their 2 cents to it as well. And again, as for the nurturing, because we can't never do enough of that.
No.
If we really want relationships to serve long-term and be reciprocal, we have to nurture that connection and be involved in other people's content as well. Personalize, and it's as simple as tagging people when you're talking about them, saying their name with or without a tag. It's just important. If there are pieces of them that that they're comfortable sharing, relate back to that in the comment, because it just makes them more real, and it shows that you really kind of care enough.
And you've noticed them, you hear them, you see them.
Yeah. Thanks for coming back again. Love that you're a listener, or appreciate your support of the podcast. Lets everybody else know, like, hey, they've got some really loyal fans as well. So that works with all of our content. The A is for asking. We want to ask those questions. We want to not just close the loop, but invite them in. And speaking of loop, that's what the L is for, is looping our learning back into everything else we create. So as we go through this process and we see, oh, that question really got people talking, or well, now they're going in a whole different direction than this episode was about. They're asking questions about what to do before this or what happens later. And we don't just leave that there to die in the feed. We go and pull that back into the next podcast or the next guest or the next piece of content.
Dedicate some time to it, kind of a thing.
Yeah. The loop is the piece where a lot of people stop. They think it's out, I've promoted, and we want to learn from what our content is doing, what's doing well out there, what podcast episodes are doing well, and why, so we can build more of that into future episodes.
Yeah. And I love that. And it's, again, taking that extra time to really pay attention to what's going on in like what you're getting reactions from, and, building new content around it, but then also seeing what other people are posting about, which, I'm guilty of not necessarily letting that sink in so that I can use it, for my own posting.
Yeah, it's hard because we have to slow down a little bit, and many of us have a lot of different things we have to get done every day. So you're absolutely right about, if we can build that in somewhere in our week or month, whatever way we want to look at it, that will give us that space to really do it. We might not do it all the time.
I know.
But practicing more of this also builds the muscle for how to do it going forward. And as you know, podcast episodes have long legs, a long shelf life.
Yep.
And that's the beauty of when we learn how to really keep that conversation going and bringing it back up to the surface when it's relevant, then we get even more out of this content that we created maybe even a year ago or beyond.
Yeah. And I've again been listening to you for a very long time. So I'm trying to weave it into my daily life. But I have noticed that when I'm more open, when I'm more vulnerable and kind of like the inner workings of what's going on behind my business, that I get more reactions in social. And so, but it's good because I'm like, I've got to stop keeping that wall up. I just got to let myself out there. But then also, like, when you do get feedback, it's like, oh, I want that feedback again on all of my posts. Like, it feels good, right? So you want to do it again. You want to repeat it.
Right, exactly. And we have to pause on that end of it too, and really let that in and see how fun it can be, and how reinforcing and supportive, and that there are a lot of people out there who want to join the conversations on social media or around your podcast episode, but we may not always be inviting them in the way that they need to be pulled in.
Oh, I never thought of that.
That's the other part of the equation, right? You might be doing everything right, and it's not as comfortable or easy for them. So the more we kind of work at it, we learn the things that help other people step in enough to give a reply. Not everyone will do that.
No.
That's not their tendency, but we can make it easier to invite them in to the conversation.
That's true. And I think everyone should just follow you and see what you're doing. That's the easier way.
I learned by watching others. So
I know, because sometimes you see it in practice and you're like, oh, that's good.
Yeah, I love it. It's great.
I know.
I love it. So I'd love to connect with everybody. Absolutely.
That's awesome. So how can people find you? And then I know you got some amazing resources and like how to build trust and, have these great conversations online.
People can find me pretty much anywhere online as Deb Coman, Coman. DebComan.com is my website. I have a 21 trust building conversation starters.
Perfect.
That people can grab at debcoman.com/trust topics. And that'll just start opening the door to how you can, either look at them for inspiration or see how well you're already doing. And you may find a lot of surprises there that you haven't thought about using in your own content and podcast.
Yeah. Thank you so much. You always have such great insight, and I love learning from you. And it's always good reminders to kind of take that time and be more intentional and be more connected with people. So thank you.
Thank you so much. I loved it, Lyndsay. I loved our conversation.
All right. See ya.